Right. Okay. So I want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of a very special man who passed away in Manchester on Friday. Many of you will have seen the little hesped that I put up on the group. Dain Osher Yaakov Westheim, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, passed away on Friday. He was very close to me, and he was a great man, and I want to dedicate this shiur to his memory. Harav Osher Yaakov ben Harav Aaron. Okay, so we left off last time. We talked about yachatz. We talked about splitting the matzah into two, and we now arrive at the main part of the Seder service. Hang on a second, Johnny Halpern wants to say something. Yes, Johnny.
There's a front page obituary on Dain Westheim in the Jewish Chronicles on the front page. On the internet.
Is okay. Thank you for that. I will do that afterwards. Thank you for telling me that. So now we arrive at the main part of the Seder, which is, of course, Magid. Magid, which is the same root, of course, as the word Haggadah. It means to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That is what this whole Seder business is all about. And we start off with a very, very strange statement. It's one of those statements which we say in Aramaic. If you remember when we spoke on our first shiur here, we spoke about the Bedikat Chametz and the Biur Chametz, and we spoke about the expressions, the statement that we make of Kol Chamira, where we make our Chametz that we have forgotten, where we make it like the dust of the earth, and we said it in Aramaic. And if you remember, we made the translation into English because it's something that we have to understand very clearly. We're making a statement here. And Aramaic was the lingua franca. That was what everybody spoke in those days. And you'll see from this halachma anya, which is in Aramaic, that this is another statement which is very important that everybody understands, and therefore was said in the vernacular. And therefore it's very important that we understand what it says and what it means, and we should say it not only in the Aramaic, but we should also say it in a language that we understand, whether that be Hebrew, whether that be English or any other language. We should say in a language that we understand. And let's just have a look at this statement, because it's got some very strange aspects to it that I want to discuss with you. It says as follows: Ha lachma anya di achalu avatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Mitzrayim. Of course, they're referring to what? They're referring to the matzah, the bread of affliction. Kol dichvin yete v'yechol, kol ditzrich yete v'yifsach. Anybody who is hungry, let him come and eat. Anybody who is needy, let him come and join our Korban Pesach. Hashta hacha. This year we are here. L'shana haba ba'ara de Yisrael. The next year we should be. It's a prayer. Next year may we be in Eretz Yisrael. Hashta avdei. This year we are slaves. L'shana haba b'nei chorin. Next year may we be free men. Okay, so that's a statement that we say before we start the Magid, that we point to the matzah and we say that this is the bread of affliction. This is the poor man's bread, which our fathers ate in Mitzrayim. Everybody that wants to come and join us, who's needy, can do so. Now, there are several problems with this statement. There are at least, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 potential problems with that small statement. Who would like to tell me a problem with that short statement that we've just said? There are 4 that I can see. Any offers? Yes, we've got Paul Westbrook.
It's a bit late to start inviting people.
Okay, firstly, it is a bit late. That's absolutely right. It's a bit late. You've already closed the door. You've already said Kiddush. You've washed your hands, or somebody's washed their hands. The Baal Seder at least has washed his hands. You've had Karpas, and suddenly you think, oh, I think I'll invite somebody. It's a bit late. It is a bit late. So what's that all about? It's also a bit late in terms of the original offer, which is in there, which says, "Kol ditzrich yetei v'yifsach." Anybody who is needy must come and join our Korban Pesach, because when we had the Beit HaMikdash and we did a Korban Pesach, you had to be registered. It was a bit like when we do our shul dues. You have to be registered beforehand to take part. You can't just turn up on the night and expect that there's stuff there for you. You had to be registered. When the Korban Pesach was done on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, you already knew at that point who was going to take part in that Korban Pesach, who was going to eat from that Korban Pesach, because, excuse me, it was Sela Bayis. It was a lamb or a kid for each house, and if the household was too small for a whole lamb, you would gather together with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends, and you would all join together and you would have Seder together and you would eat the Korban Pesach together. But the rule was you had to be registered on that Korban Pesach before it was shechted. So it's too late. Immediately, well, not even immediately before, but after the Seder has begun, it's too late to invite people to come and partake of the Korban Pesach. And as Paul said, it's a bit late to invite guests when you've already started. Who are these guests that you're speaking to? Is it just lip service that we're saying, you know, anybody that's hungry, come and eat, but actually there's nobody there? Because anybody who's already there is already there, and you've closed the door, and there's nobody that's needy around. So yes, that's the first thing. It's a bit late. Hillary, you've got your hand up.
Well, actually, John, it's me. I just wanted to ask you two things. Should we actually say that this year, all strangers, or should we actually say that this year? In all honesty. Okay,
good question. Let me answer that when we've gone through the other things that are wrong with it, because I think that's a very, very good question. It was perhaps even a better question last year than it is this year.
Okay, and the other thing is, one of the things you said is that next year we're in Israel, but we are in Israel now. Those are people who are in Israel.
Should we say that? That's another good question. Okay. Right.
Can I just say?
So that's one of the things. That's one of the four things. One sec, Hillary. That's one of the four things. Is how can we say Hashtahacha? This year we are here. Next year may we be in the land of Israel. That doesn't make any sense. Why are we saying things that don't make sense? How can we say this year we are here, next year we should be in the land of Israel, when we're already in the land of Israel? That statement is nonsensical. So that's number two thing that we've got that's not right with this. Yes, Hillary.
Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I remember learning the idea was that you opened your doors and you literally, if there were any strangers, you're meant to have a stranger at your Pesach table, somebody you don't necessarily know. If there's anybody who's maybe not changed their minds, become religious, wandering, wants to refuge of whatever, I thought that was the idea of it.
Well, as far as I'm aware, there's not a minhag at this point to open the door. We open the door later on, of course, for Shvoch Chamatcha.
Yeah.
But not at this point. We don't open the door at this point. Anyway, let's be honest. What's the chances that you're going to open your door on Ehud Nor?
Yeah,
right?
But
in the corridor on the 12th floor of Ehud Man. Oh no, you're not there anymore, are you? I forgot.
Oh, you're talking about now. I'm talking
about now. This is something that we do. What's the chances that you're going to open your door into your corridor and find somebody wandering around who's looking for a Seder to go to. I mean, it's a
none, because I'm not on the 12th floor.
I know, I realise that now. Yeah, I forgot. But the point remains. The point remains. Okay, so now we've managed to get two of the four things.
Excuse me.
Who's that?
It's Lawrence.
Lawrence, where are you, Lawrence? I can't see you.
Because I'm dark. Can you see me? Asa.
Okay, yes, there you are, Lawrence. Go ahead.
Okay. Wasn't this based around the temple? Very much for sacrifices and so on. So aren't we referring to the area inside of Eretz Israel as the temple area, Jerusalem, and not necessarily the rest of the country? I don't know.
Okay, so that's a good question. And actually, if you look at the halach ma'anya that we've just said, it's clear that it's a mishmash of both. Because on the one hand, we're saying, come and join us with the Korban Pesach. Well, we only had the Korban Pesach when there was a Bet HaMikdash, and we only had the Korban Pesach if we were in Yerushalayim. So on that point, you're absolutely right, Lawrence. And also, we say this year we're here, and next year we should be in the land of Israel. So that clearly was inserted at a time when we had been exiled from the land of Israel. So it's a mishmash. It makes no sense either way. We've got either we're in Israel and we're offering people to come to join the Korban Pesach, or we're not in Israel and we're wishing that we were in Israel next year. So that's another problem that we've raised. Yes, Julia?
Slaves. We're not really free at the moment to leave our houses to go very far, but we're certainly not slaves.
Okay, that's certainly one of the four that I had in my mind, is that it's difficult for us to say, and that's what I said, that probably it was more difficult last year than this year. Hashta avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin. This year we are slaves. Next year we should be free men. I'd like to just take up what Julia just said then. I remember last year we had a whole conversation, myself and people around my Seder table, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ravi Doe mentioned this in one of his Shiurim. How can we say such a thing? Hashta avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin. How can we say that this year we're slaves? We're not slaves. We live in a sovereign land. We live in our own country, which is, I'm coming to you in a second, Faye. We live in our own country. We're not slaves. We can do whatever we want. By no means could we be described as slaves. And the suggestion was that we shouldn't even be saying this. How can we possibly say that? And I think that's how I felt last year. I don't actually remember whether we said it around my Seder last year, or whether we just said it and then said, I don't think we should have said that. And then we had a conversation about it. I can't really remember. But I thought this year, actually, be careful what you wish for, sort of thing. Because I certainly feel able this year to say, Hashta avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin. A free person can leave his house whenever he wants. He can go to work if he's got a job. He can go to the shops if he wants to go to the shops. He can go to the cinema if he wants to go to the cinema. He can go to the beach. He can go to the park. He can do whatever he wants. He can go and visit his neighbors, his children, his friends. We are not able to do that right now. Now, that's not because we have been enslaved by a slave taskmaster, but we are not free people. And we have been shown, I think, in a most horrendous way, people losing their lives, as we said, people who are ill, and what all this so-called slavery that we're imposing on ourselves is all obviously for a good reason, to try and prevent those horrible things happening. But nevertheless, it has demonstrated to us, I think, in stark contrast to last year, that we are not actually totally free people. And I certainly, for one, will be saying that with some poignancy this year, which I didn't last year. But that certainly is something that I wanted to raise. Thank you for that, Julia. Faye, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I remember last year, or maybe even the year before, we talked about everybody is enslaved to something. That was kind of where we went with it in the past. I remember bringing up the song by Bob Dylan, you know, everybody's got to serve somebody. And that's a different type of a slavery. Yes, this year it has a completely different meaning. we're not enslaved so much, except maybe to the computer and our media, but we're certainly not enslaved to the outward things in the world that we were enslaved to before. So yeah, okay, my point.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We did speak about that last year, Faye. Thank you for reminding us on that. And that still remains. That still remains. But I think we've been given a bit of a lesson on that this year, sadly. So I think that's a very good point. Michael Leaf.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Going back to Kol Dichin Yetzer V'Yechol, could it be effectively a rhetorical statement if such a thing exists? Doesn't need an answer, but it's perhaps making the guests at the table, if there are any, feel more welcome.
Interesting. Yeah, that could be. Well, that's right. It could be that the Baal Seder is standing up and saying, "I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight, especially our guests. It's lovely to have guests here with us, and we're very happy that you've joined us." Yeah, that's a good answer. Stanley.
Okay, I want to say what is interesting about slavery. I heard the drasha from Rabbi Sachs, and he said that in most horrendous stuff in slavery, it's when you're not master of your own time. Okay, if you have to do what somebody has to tell you to do, and you're not master of your own time, and right now, it's not compared to slavery, it's like temporary in that, and I think we're not enslaved in any circumstances, because we can do with our time anything what we want to.
Okay, I accept that. On the other hand,
movement. Only movements temporarily we.
Okay, I accept that. I accept that. However, if you compare the situation that we are in now to the situation that we were in last year this time, I think that many people would suggest, at least in a comparative sense, that we are not as free as we jolly well thought we were last year. Okay, so we've actually.
Sorry, can I comment?
Yes, of course.
Can I ask, could it not just be a reminder to everybody sitting after all these 2,000 years or something of how times were, how we were, what could happen, how we should invite people in? It's just a reminder, a statement, a reminder of our past history.
I think the reminder of our past history comes with the very next statement, which is Avadim Hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That's the reminder of where we came from, where we were. This is a statement which says Hashta Avdei. Now we are slaves, and this was written. This was added into the Seder after the destruction of the temple. When we were indeed slaves, we were not sovereign in our own land. Those that were still in Israel, very few of them that were left over, were under the subjugation of the Romans. Most of them had been exiled and were in other lands which were ruled by the Roman Empire, and many of them were actually physically slaves. So I think that whilst it is a reminder of what there was then, it's a statement that at least last year, many of us had difficulty relating to. I think that this year we can relate to it a little bit more. So I want to just move on now to the fourth one that we haven't yet mentioned. The fourth problem with this statement of Halach Ma'anya. And it's something that Rabbi Sachs brings out in his Haggadah. By the way, if you haven't got this, it's probably a bit late to get it for this year. But if you haven't got it, I recommend that you order it for next year. It's absolutely brilliant, as you can imagine. It's Jonathan Sachs's commentary on the Haggadah, and he says this about Halach Ma'anya. He raises a question which I hadn't actually thought of, but he raises this. He says, "This is the bread of affliction. everybody should come, who's hungry should come and eat. What kind of an invitation is that? You say to somebody, I'm eating this piece of matzah. Here is some matzah. It's our poor man's bread. It's the bread of affliction. Come and join me in this bread of affliction. That's not much of an invitation. If somebody gave me a dinner invitation and said, we're going to have poor man's food here, we're just going to have gruel and water, I'm not sure that I'd be all that keen to join, to be honest. So Rabbi Sachs asks the question, is that this is a strange invitation to give to somebody to come and join you in a partaking of a meal that consists of poor man's bread, or the bread of affliction. And he answers the question most beautifully by quoting Primo Levi. Primo Levi was a Holocaust survivor, became a great writer. He survived Auschwitz, and he wrote a famous book called "If This Is a Man," and he describes his experiences there. And I'm going to read to you what he wrote about the Seder in Auschwitz, and particularly in 1945. He says, Rabbi Sachs writes as follows: according to Levi, the worst time of all was when the Nazis left in January 1945, fearing the Russian advance. All prisoners who could walk were taken on the brutal death marches. The only people left in the camp were those too ill to move. For 10 days, they were left alone with only scraps of food and fuel. Levi describes how he worked to light a fire and bring some warmth to his fellow prisoners, many of them dying. He then writes as follows, and he quotes, "When the broken window was repaired and the stove began to spread its heat, something seemed to relax in everyone. And at that moment, Towarowski, a Franco-Pole of 23 who had typhus, proposed to the others that each of them offer a slice of bread to us three who had been working. And so it was agreed. Only a day before, a similar event would have been inconceivable. The law of the lager, the concentration camp, said, eat your own bread, and if you can, eat that of your neighbor, and left no room for gratitude. This meant that the law of the lager was dead. It was the first human gesture that occurred amongst us. I believe that that moment can be dated as the beginning of the change by which we who had not died slowly changed from Haftlinger, prisoners, to free men again." Amazingly powerful words that he says, that when you have poor man's bread, the symbol of freedom is that you show gratitude to others and you share that little bit that you have with others. And he says that's what makes the difference between slaves and free men. And Rabbi Sachs continues, and he says, sharing food is the first act through which slaves become free human beings. One who fears tomorrow does not offer his bread to others, but one who is willing to divide his food with a stranger has already shown himself capable of fellowship and faith, the two things from which hope is born. That is why we begin the Seder by inviting others to join us. Bread shared is no longer the bread of oppression. Reaching out to others, giving help to the needy, and companionship to those who are alone, we bring freedom into the world, and with freedom, we bring God into the world. So I think that is very moving and very appropriate particularly for this year, because there are people there who are very lonely this year. We're all going to be lonely to some degree. We're all going to be less full of company, less full of family than we normally are. And this is going to be very difficult for all of us, some more than others. Of course, those who are all on their own, it's going to be particularly difficult. And this Holach Ma'anya, although we can't actually bring those people into our house this year, nevertheless, we have to think about that. And we have to think about what Primo Levi said. And that is that whatever we have to share it. And this statement of Holach Ma'anya is the beginning of the change from slaves to free people. And if you think about what has gone on in the last, what is it? Gosh, it's only a few weeks, isn't it, since this whole coronavirus nightmare began. If you think about what has gone on, if you think about the kindness that people have done, the offers that people have made to go and get food for other people, to bring medicines for other people who can't get out, the efforts that people have made to cheer other people up and to keep communities going, all those things are signs of a free society. They're signs of freedom, because whatever it is that we've got, we're willing to share. And this has always been a particular feature of Pesach. There's something called Kimcha de Pischa, which has always been a feature of Pesach, and that is that people give money before Pesach to poor people. They give money to people who collect money so that they can provide the basics for Pesach for people who can't afford it. And that's always been something which has been, excuse me, which has been a very strong feature of our people. And that, I think, is what Rabbi Sachs is getting at here when he's quoting Primo Levi there. Somebody who had their hand up a minute ago, and I can't remember who it was. Nachum, I think it was. Yes, Nachum.
Yes, my Haggadah is.
Who's Haggadah?
It's Rabbi Hirsch. It says
Rabbi Hirsch.
This is the bread of dependence. It doesn't use the word affliction which our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Dependence, the slaves, we were slaves, we were dependent on this particular type of food in order to survive. And it may not be an essence of affliction, but it may be that this is just what we had to eat, and we were dependent to get our calories from this substance. I mean, I don't know why they made dependence, but made it instead of affliction.
Okay, that's very interesting. As you know, I'm a big fan of Rabbi Hirsch, and I would very much hesitate to say that something's not quite right there. Obviously, I haven't understand where he's coming from, because the word ania is from the word ania, which means affliction. It doesn't mean dependence. In the translation of the word is affliction. I think that his translation of dependence is a loose translation to obviously get over a meaning that he wants to say, but the word itself means affliction. We have it. That word comes in the Torah another place. We have it in the Torah, which is with Yom Kippur. We're told that we have to afflict ourselves, and that means fasting. When the Torah tells us that we have to afflict ourselves on Yom Kippur, that means that we are fasting. We don't have anything to eat. So I think that the idea of a bread of affliction means that this is the only thing that we had to eat, and it was a poor type of food. What's interesting, by the way, is that nowhere in the Torah does it tell you that the slaves ate matzah, except on one occasion. Where is that? Where are we told that the Israelites in Egypt ate matzah? We're only told it on one occasion. Stephen Fagan, I can see your mouth moving, but say again? Yeah, well, what does it say there?
Oh gosh.
I think I don't know if in Baalotcha it says that the slaves ate matzah. Maybe I'm wrong. You can look it up and tell us later.
I'll look it up.
Okay, so where does it say that the slaves ate matzah? Okay, Michael?
Yetziat Mitzrayim, sure.
Correct. Yetziat Mitzrayim. That is the only place that we are told that the Israelites ate matzah. There is nowhere in the Torah which tells us that matzah was eaten by the slaves because they didn't have time for it to rise. That is something which the rabbis deduce from various things. And that's why it's called halach ma'anya. It's the bread of our affliction. But actually in the Torah, it's not the bread of our affliction at all. According to the Torah, matzah is not the bread of affliction at all. It is completely the opposite. It is the bread of our freedom. Because the only place that the Torah mentions the eating of matzah is when we left Mitzrayim. When we had to have the Korban Pesach, we ate it with matzah and maror, and then we were off out of Egypt. Yes, Nachum? Nachum?
Nechama.
Nechama.
I think that Abraham gave matzah to the angels that came to him.
Yes, he did. That's right. That is correct. He did. And there is an opinion that was also around Pesach time, but we hadn't yet been down to Mitzrayim, so we hadn't yet left. So that actually doesn't count. Hillary.
Also, it's the bread of humility. It's that we shouldn't be inflated in ourselves, and that must mean something.
Yeah, that's another expression that we have with chametz. What is chametz? The difference between matzah and chametz is that the chametz rises. And how does it rise? It gets full of air, and it's warm air. Isn't that right? Warm air. Yeah, or hot air, as we would call it in English. So somebody who is chametz is full of hot air. And what the matzah is coming to teach us is humility, that we should come down a few pegs and not be full of hot air. That's what Hillary is there referring to. Okay, so halach ma'anya, I think this year is something which we can think about a little bit more thoroughly, I suppose, than in previous years. And like other things that we've mentioned so far, I believe that this year I'm feeling very chastened, if that's such a word. Johnny, I'll come to you in a sec. I'm feeling very chastened because last year I think that I was full of hot air and I was arrogant, and I said, I'm not saying this halach ma'anya business. I'm already in the land of Israel. I'm already a free man. Well, you know what? I'm not even really in the land of Israel, am I? I'm in my house. I can't even go out into the land of Israel. I'm not allowed more than 100 meters from my house into the land of Israel. So I'm going to be saying, when I say this year, I'm going to be saying, Hashta'acha. This year I'm here, stuck in my house. Lashana haba ba'arad Israel. May next year we be able, and a lot sooner than next year, may we all be able to get out and see the land of Israel, to visit the land of Israel, to carry on enjoying the land of Israel and not just the four walls of our house. And similarly, Hashta Avdei, this year I feel enslaved by this coronavirus. L'shana haba b'nei chorim. By next year, please God, may we all be released from that slavery of the coronavirus, and we shall be truly free men again. Last year, I think that I had an air of arrogance about the way I looked at this. Everything, we were sitting pretty, and this is what I said the other day, when we were talking about the Seder being on our own, and I said that this is the first time that really we've not had our own way. At least I've not had my own way, and I'm feeling this very strongly this year. And this year I will say halach ma'anya with a great deal more humility and a great deal more matzah than perhaps I should have done last year and didn't. So that's what I wanted to say about halach ma'anya. Okay. Anybody want to say anything about halach ma'anya before we move on to Nishtana? Any more points on that? Okay. Oh yes, Johnny Halpin, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say on the word aniyah in Rosh Hashanah Yikotevun, we say at the end miye oni umiye oshai.
Miye oni, yeah, that's miye oni.
Who will be poor?
Who will become poor? Yeah, who will become poor?
Same word though.
I'm not sure.
Ayin nun yud.
Ayin nun yud. Is it the same? Is it the same root? I suppose it is. Yeah. If you're poor, you're afflicted. I guess that is the same root. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Nishtana halayla hazeh. Well, I think we can ask that question very clearly, can't we? this year. Nishtana halayla hazeh. What is different about this year? Well, things are very much different. Ivor, you wanted to say something before we move on?
Yeah. Going back to what you said about the Korban Pesach.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that Rabbi Kasha says that Korban Pesach was mentioned, this is the Torah's way of telling us that no Israelite, no Jew should in fact leave his relatives and his friends the way he lives. In other words, cancel all the hotels, which has happened this year. We should be within the Chek HaMishpacha and with our friends.
Okay, well, that is the ideal, of course. And I don't remember when this fashion for going to hotels and things came out. I don't think it's all that long ago. I don't remember when I was a kid, or even when my kids were little, 25 years ago. I don't remember many people going off to hotels. I think it's a fairly modern phenomenon. One of the things that really struck me as being bizarre a couple of years ago, I saw advertised Pesach in Sharm el Sheikh. People were actually going to Egypt to celebrate Pesach. Now, I thought that was really bizarre. But, you know, who am I to criticize? Yes, Faye?
I can give you the exact time it started. 1978 it started. Because my father-in-law was one of the originators. He and his partner were the originators of turning hotels into kosher Pesach. That was a business that they started. 1978.
Okay, 1978. So it's a fairly modern phenomenon. I think it's taken off.
Or maybe 79, maybe Pesach of 79. Because I'm thinking when I first started dating my
It's a fairly modern phenomenon, 40 years or so. Is that 40 years? 79? Yeah, I suppose it is. In the last sort of 10 years, it's really taken off, I think, as I suppose as people have become more affluent and can afford to do such a thing. Okay. So, Nishtana halayla hazeh. What is different about these 4 days, this night, as opposed to the other 4 nights? We all know it. I suspect that there will be. What about the Cumberland in Bournemouth? Paul says. Yeah, I don't know. I never went as a kid. Did you go as a kid to the Cumberland for Pesach? No. I went to the Majestic in the summer, mind. But the Cumberland was was the posh people. Right. Okay. So right. So Nishtana halayla hazeh. 4 questions. Now I suspect there will be many of you who will be saying the Nishtana this year for the first time in many years. I can see Anita nodding. Anita, when was the last time that you said the Nishtana?
But I was a child at home. I was the youngest. So
okay.
I used to say.
So that's not very long ago then?
No, a few years ago.
Okay. So I think that what we will do is, after the Shiur, I'd like you all to think about the last time that you said the Nishtana and put it on the family group, how many years ago it was that you last said Nishtana. I will start the ball rolling. I'm definitely not going to be the biggest. I'll probably be one of the youngest. The last time I did it was when before my nephew, who is now 40, he could say it. So I guess when he was 3. So for me, it's probably 37 years ago since I've said the Nishtana. I'm going to be the youngest around my table this year. So I will be saying it for the first time in 37 years. After the Shiur, please put on the group how many years ago it is since you said Nishtana, and we'll see who's the longest. Okay, so let's just have a look at this Nishtana, because we've heard it every single year. Either we've said it or we've heard it from our children or our grandchildren. And I just want to go through and tell you a little bit about the history of Nishtana. Okay, Nechama.
I wanted to ask, why does the youngest the group together?
Okay. Let me answer that question. Let me answer that question. The question, for those who didn't hear it because it wasn't very clear, is why is it the youngest child that asks the questions? Let me answer that as we go along in going through the history, because it will become clear as to why that is the case. How old is the concept of Nishtana halayla hazeh? Where do we first see the Nishtana mentioned? Any offers? Any offers? Where is the Nishtana first mentioned? Michael?
The 4 sons?
No. I mean, the 4 sons are also mentioned, but not actually. I'm talking about the actual Nishtana itself. Barbara?
In the Mishnah.
It's in the Mishnah, correct. It's in the Mishnah.
I've been to a lot of Shiurim this week.
Very good, excellent. We've all been to a lot of Shiurim this week. That's one of the advantages of being stuck at home. Who would have thought that we would have 30 participants in a 4th Pesach Shiur in Ramat Poleg and South Beach and wherever else? Quite amazing. So yeah, Barbara's quite right. It's mentioned in the Mishnah. It's the Mishnah.
Pandemic of Shiurim, Johnny.
Sorry?
Pandemic of Shiurim.
Pandemic of Shiurim, yeah, that's right. So it's mentioned in the Mishnah. It's in Masechet Pesachim, obviously. It's the 10th Perek and the 4th Mishnah. I'm going to read you the Mishnah and translate it as we go along. And I want you to point out to me once I've finished what the differences are between the Mishnah's Nishtana and the Nishtana that we recognize from our Haggadah. Mazgu lo kos sheni. The second cup is poured out, the second cup of wine. V'kan, and here, haben shoel aviv. The son asks his father. Ve'em ein dat baben. And if the son does not have the ability to ask, aviv melamdo, his father should teach him. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. Shebechol haleilot anu ochlin chametz umatzah. Halayla hazeh kulo matzah. You don't need me to translate that. Shebechol haleilot anu ochlin sha'a yirakot. Halayla hazeh maror. You don't need me to translate that. Shebechol haleilot anu ochlin basar tzali shaluk umavushal. On all other nights of the year, we eat meat that is either roasted or boiled in water. Halayla hazeh, but on this night, kulo tzali, it is completely roasted. Shebechol haleilot anu matbilin pa'am achat. On all other nights, we dip in once. Halayla hazeh shtei pa'amim. But on this night, we dip in twice. Ulefi da'ato shel ben, and according to the intelligence or the maturity of the child, aviv melamdo, the father will teach him the answers to these questions, and then we go on to Aramei Oved Avi. So that's the Mishnah's description of Ma Nishtana that the child asks. So where are the differences there? Johnny?
Meat, talking about meat.
Yeah, that's one.
They don't mention the leaning.
Don't mention leaning, that's two. Any others? Any others? Faye?
Afilu pamachad. Afilu pamachad.
Okay, so the Mishnah says, that's quite right, Faye. The Mishnah says, Shebechol haleilot, on all of the nights, anu matbilim, we dip in pa'am achat, once. And what do we say? We say, ein anu matbilin, we do not dip in afilu pa'am achat, not even once. So it seems that at the time of the Mishnah, they did dip in. They dipped in once. And the question is, why are we dipping in twice and not once? So that's three differences that we have found in the Nishtana of the Mishnah to the Nishtana of today. And let's look at those one by one and see what they can teach us. So the first one, of course, and the very obvious one, is that the Mishnah talks about roasted meat. What's it talking about there? What's the Mishnah talking about? What's the Mishnah talking about? Ruth, what's the Mishnah talking about?
Would it be talking about the lamb, the Paschal
Yes,
lamb?
correct. It's talking about the Paschal lamb. The Korban Pesach, one of the halachot of the Korban Pesach itself was that it had to be roasted on a spit. It had to be fully roasted. The Torah tells us exactly how it had to be done, with its head folded down and its arms and legs. No, there's no arms, does it? Its four legs crossed underneath its body. In other words, it's completely, contracted up together, head down, everything all as narrow as it possibly can be. And it had to be roasted, completely roasted. You were not allowed to boil or bake or broil or put it in a slow cooker. It had to be roasted on a flame. That is how the Korban Pesach had to be made, and that's how the Korban Pesach had to be eaten, completely roasted. A bit like a shawarma, really, which goes round on a spit. Although it was actually not vertical the way a shawarma is, it had to be horizontal because of the way the lamb had to be folded up on itself, as I've just described. So
didn't they do that in Egypt, Johnny? They had to do that in Egypt so the Egyptians could smell it, I think.
Yeah, well, they had to, that was part of the
punishment,
part of the challenge. Part of the challenge of the Korban Pesach in Egypt was that the Bnei Yisrael were actually shechting and eating something which the Egyptians revered. One of the pantheon of gods that the Egyptians had was apparently the sheep or the lamb. So what Johnny is saying, is referring to, is that this was a challenge of the Bnei Yisrael, that they had to do this process and basically roast, fully roast and completely and eat up the god of the Egyptians. So this Mishnah, of course, is referring to the time when we had a Beit HaMikdash and we were eating the Korban Pesach. So one of the four questions that the son asks is, hey, Daddy, what's going on here? Why have we got roast meat tonight? Clearly, having roast lamb was not something which they had on a regular basis. Otherwise, he wouldn't have noticed that it was different. It was not something that they did on a regular basis. And here they are on Seder night, sitting down and eating this roasted lamb. And presumably, the son who is also referring, I imagine that the father, imagine the scene, the father will have taken the son with him to the Beit HaMikdash on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan with their little lamb or their kid, goat, and they would have been there. They would have watched the avodah, they watched the Kohen shecht it and do the avodah, and then they would have taken it home and they would have roasted it together. And I'm sure the father would have been there, the son would have been there with the father, learning in the same way as we all took our kids to burn the chametz and to tashlich and all the things that we do. We take our kids to teach them. And so the son is saying, hang on, this is something very strange. We don't normally do this. So that's the reference to the roasted meat, which of course we don't say in our Nishtana because we don't have a Korban Pesach. So we don't have that question. So in order to keep the symmetry of the four questions, come to you in a sec, Lawrence, I've seen your hand. In order to keep the symmetry of the questions, we needed to add in another question. And as somebody pointed out, one of the differences, I think it was Johnny, one of the differences is that the Nishtana of the Mishnah does not have our question, our fourth question, about leaning, about why we are all leaning tonight. And that was the question that the Chachamim put in to maintain the symmetry of four questions, because they had to take out the one about the Korban Pesach. Yes, Lawrence?
Just quickie. You said take either the lamb or a goat, where it's specifically the Paschal lamb to go and Yeah, it wouldn't. They wouldn't have taken a goat for Pesach, would they?
Yeah, some people did. You were allowed to take a goat or a lamb. We call it the Paschal lamb because the Paschal lamb or goat is it's a bit wordy, and I guess most people did take lambs. But yes, you could use a goat as well. It could be a goat.
Okay.
Yes, Paul.
Did they have a Korban Pesach at the time of the Mishnah?
Good question. Absolutely not, of course. Very good question. They didn't have a Korban Pesach in the Mishnah at the time of the Mishnah because the Mishnah was written, as we all know, around about the year 200. The destruction of the temple took place in the year 70. So the Mishnah, when the Mishnah was written, they did not have a Korban Pesach. However, what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi has done here is because remember what this was all about. The Mishnah was written down by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi so that we would not forget how to do things and would not forget the oral law, would not forget the way stuff had to be done because of the dispersal. So what the Mishnah is describing only 130 years after the destruction of the temple, it's describing what went on then so that we don't forget it. By this time, the rabbis had not altered the Nishtana for contemporary times. That is how we know that our Nishtana is younger, is not as old as the Nishtana of the Mishnah. The Nishtana of the Mishnah is teaching us what they did back in the day. So back in the day when they had a Beit HaMikdash, they would have sat round, they'd have poured out the second cup of wine. They still had a mitzvah of 4 cups in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and then they would do the Nishtana. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is telling us not what he did at his time. Maybe he did do that as a zeicher, as a remembrance. We have now changed that. The Chachamim over the years have changed it to make it more relevant to us. But at the time, it was important that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote that down as to what happened then. Now, because it was written down in the Mishnah, we now have license to change it because we won't forget what went on in the Beit HaMikdash because it's written down for us in the Mishnah. So in some ways it's connected because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was telling us, don't forget, this is how you do it in the Beit HaMikdash. And we've got that as a record now, thanks to him. We can now make it a little bit more relevant to us and change that question about the Korban Pesach to a question about leaning. Okay. Now, the third difference, Hillary, yes.
Also, it's very relevant about the leaning because the leaning denotes freedom, which we weren't free when we had when we were in Egypt, but leaning is how they used to lean when they would eat, when they sat. So it was not them, like the Romans, and you know what I mean? They used to.
Okay.
So after we lean now because we're free now.
Right. Okay. Correct. So what Hillary is saying is that when the rabbis were looking for something to replace that question about the Korban Pesach, because that doesn't apply to us anymore, they were looking around and said, well, what other question can we see? What other things are different about this night that we can put in as a fourth question? What they chose was the concept of leaning. Because by this time, of course, when the rabbis inserted this, now, I don't know exactly when it was, but it was certainly some time after the Mishnah, and it will almost certainly have been after the period of the Roman Empire, and it will have been at a time when the Jews were certainly not sovereign in their own land. It will have been a time almost certainly when the Jews were persecuted, because they were persecuted all the time. And they will have not have been the kind of people that lounged about on shares long when they ate their meals, partly because by this time we had progressed or regressed, whichever way you want to look at it, to eating at a table as opposed to lounging around on a couch with a little individual table, which is how they used to do it then. That would definitely be something which a child would notice was different. And it denotes freedom because I'm sure all of you have seen the films which depict the times of the Romans, whether it be the Spartacus or any of those things, where the free people are lying around on these chaises long and being fed grapes by a slave and all that kind of stuff. That's the imagery that we have when we're meant to lean. By the way, I'll just mention this whilst we're on the subject of leaning. I remember as a kid, sat round my Seder table in our upright chairs, as I am at the moment sitting at the table, and having to lean. So what I do is I had my cup of wine or grape juice or whatever it was, and I would lean and I would sit there like this on my chair, right, as uncomfortable as it possibly could be, trying not to fall over, trying to drink while I'm leaning, trying not to dribble the wine down my white shirt so that my mummy and daddy didn't shout at me for making a mess, but nevertheless trying to lean to the left-hand side. Now that really was not doing the job, because the idea of leaning is meant to be something which is pleasurable. It's meant to be something which you do as a free person. To try and lean on a chair which doesn't have any arms and suspend yourself at 45 degrees, trying to drink out of the side of your mouth and not dribble it down you, is not the sign of freedom. Of course, that really wasn't doing the job properly. So the way to do the leaning, if you're going to be sitting at a regular table, is to turn your chair. I shall just try and demonstrate this. Turn your chair sideways like that. I don't know if you can see that there. My chair is turned sideways. And now I can lean on my chair like that. And at least I can be lolling around and be giving the impression of freedom, of time. If I want to sit like this, I'll sit like that. At least it's comfortable. So, and if I put a cushion on there like this, then that's my talus bag, but it'll do as a cushion for the moment. And then it's a little bit more comfortable. So if you're going to sit at the table and you're going to lean, that's the way you should do it. Another way of doing it is the way that we used to do it in my family. Well, we do it in my family, and that is to bring one of the armchairs to the table, and at least the Baal Seder sits in an armchair with lots of cushions and can sit back and lean in a comfortable way. So that's just on leaning. If you're going to do your leaning, which you should do, it's one of the mitzvahs of the night, make sure that what you're doing is actually demonstrating some freedom instead of sort of semi-acrobatics and discomfort. Okay, any comments on that? Michael?
Yes, when you lean, you're leaning to one side, and really to balance, to make sure you're not going to fall over, you should lift your legs up and put them on the lap of the person next to you.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you for that. Who's that? Ivor?
Yeah. Just two things. One, I mean, slaves were known to only be allowed to eat when they were standing. So the fact that we're sitting all together is already a sign of freedom. The other thing is, it says also, I think, I mean, the Torah doesn't waste words. The fact that it says on the Korban Pesach, etzem lo tishmeru, you shouldn't break any bones of the Korban Pesach. There was a reason for this. Because that was a sign also of the poor who were so famished they would snap every bone to get every morsel of food off of it.
Thank you. That's a very nice idea. It's not something I've heard before. Let me just expand on that. There are various halachot of the Korban Pesach, and one of them is that you weren't allowed to break the bones. What Ivor is saying is that, where's Jeffrey? I can't see Jeffrey, but he will, and Marcel, I don't know if you're still, yes, Marcel's still there. Where's Jeffrey? Can't see Jeffrey. But they will both remember that our mutual grandmother used to break the bones of the chicken out of the chicken soup and suck out the marrow. And she was not willing to waste a single morsel, a single scrap, because that's when she was a little girl, food was very scarce, and you didn't waste absolutely anything. Oh, there's Jeffrey. I can see him now. He's there. Yeah, am I right, Jeffrey?
Rose just said, I still do it.
Well, there you go. Well, there you are. Old habits die hard. Jeffrey still breaks the bones and sucks out the marrow because he learned the lessons from our parents and our grandparents. And the idea that we shouldn't break the bones that Ivor's just said is a very nice idea. It's not something I've heard before. that we don't need to do that. We're free men. We've got a whole set. We've got a whole lamb here to eat. We don't need to be schnorrers and break the bones and suck out the marrow. Thank you for that, Ivor. Very nice indeed. Okay, so we have come to the end of another hour, amazingly. And we've managed to get through Halach Ma'anya and the 4 questions. I want to answer Nechama's question. Nechama asked the question earlier on, why is it the youngest child that asked the questions? That was the question that Nechama asked. Why is it the youngest child? And I think that the simple answer is because we can all shap nachas from the kid who's learnt the Nishtana in school and who stands on his chair and says it, and we can all say how gorgeous the little kid is and how clever and how wonderful, and it's all a beautiful experience. I always used to get to say it in Yiddish because that's what I'd been taught it in school as well as in English. And particularly my grandmother, and particularly Jeffrey and Marcel's mother would always be very, very pleased with me for saying it in Yiddish. After we were on our own and no longer in their house for Seder, I used to continue to say it in Yiddish, and then my kids said it in Yiddish, and my sister still says it in Yiddish. We used to have around our Seder a lot of students. When the students in Manchester, when Pesach turned out to be term time, we used to have a lot of students around our Seder table, and we used to have all sorts of languages. We once had a Seder where we had it in Ladino, we had it in Spanish, we had it in Italian, we had it in Russian, we've had it in all sorts of things. And that was a tradition around our house. So the reason that the youngest kid says it is so that we can all shep nachas from him. But perhaps a more serious reason is a reason given by Rabbi Sachs. And he says that, and this is in contrast actually to what we're going to talk about, next time. In contrast to that, he says that we get the youngest child to ask, because what we're saying is that all children, whether they're clever, whether they're mature, whether they're educated, all of them that are capable of saying the Nishtana from age of 3, they're the ones that we want to include. We don't reject anybody. And Rabbi Sachs says that the youngest child represents the person who A, has the least knowledge, and we don't reject him. On the contrary, we want to answer him. And B, has the least maturity, and therefore it's telling us to pitch the Seder at the level of the people that you have with you. So that's Rabbi Sachs's answer to that question. Stephen and Hilary.
Hold on. I was going to say, would it not be that the youngest has the responsibility of carrying on the traditions?
Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true, and therefore it's very important that we pass on those answers to all the children, all the way down to and including the youngest. Yeah, I'll accept that as a very good answer. Okay, any other comments before we close? Okay, so tomorrow we, at the same time, we will move on to the thorniest issue always in my house. We always get stuck on this for a very long time, and that is the 4 sons. As you will know, some of you will know, I have 4 sons and a daughter. There was always a discussion about who was the wise one, who was the wicked. Well, there wasn't much discussion really. Everybody knew their roles, to be honest. But nevertheless, there was a great deal of discussion around the 4 sons. It's a part of the Seder that till this very day, I have a tremendous amount of difficulty with. I'm going to share that with you tomorrow, please God. And I would ask for you, all of you, to try and find something to soothe my difficulties around the issue of the 4 sons. Maybe I'd like to go into this year's Seder. We won't have the discussion, I'm afraid, because unfortunately the 4 boys won't be here. Neither will the girl, but there you are. That's just for this year. So unless anybody's got any other comments, we'll see you all tomorrow. Hang on, there's a hand up there, Lynn.
Yeah. Not to do with Pesach, or not to do with this year, that's why I've waited till the end. If anybody has ever lived in Kenton, there's a Kentonians in Israel Zoom meeting tonight. If you want me to pass on details to get into it, it's at 6:30.
If you could post the Zoom link onto the group, that would be very useful.
And Lynn,
Thank you.
hang on.
Ivor.
Yes, I'd just like to recommend to everybody, whoever has the, where is it? Sonsino, can you see it?
No, we can only see your background.
Hold on. Oh, it doesn't allow the picture. Anyway, the Sonsino Chumash with the Hertz by Dr. Hertz. At the end of Shemot, there's a fascinating insight into the history of Egypt. In other words, it gives it a fantastic perspective, the whole of the Seder.
Okay. Well, all of the Anglos will definitely remember the Hertz Chumash, which was the standard Chumash in every United Synagogue type shul before Art Scroll came along. So
it's called additional notes to Exodus, Israel in Egypt, the historical problems. What
page is it on, Ivor?
394.
394 in the Hertz Chumash. I'm sure many of you will have them in your bookcases. Thank you, Ivor.
Okay, Lynn, can I just say, I did answer your email and I asked you to send us your phone number so that we could arrange something, but you haven't answered me yet. So just have a look.
Okay, before we just carry on, I'm just going to stop the recording. You can all talk to one another. I'm going to unmute you. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.